And now you own Community Bakery
Yep.
and apartment buildings. Who is Joe Fox?
I'd have to think about that for a while before I could answer. I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm just somebody who likes to operate businesses, I guess, small businesses for the most part. I kind of got used to doing that type of activity when I was young and just kept on. In fact, there's an irony to the fact that at this point in my life, I'm selling donuts and newspapers, and I did that when I was a kid.
You did? Where'd you grew up in Missouri?
Grew up in St. Louis, sold newspapers on the street corner. The day Kennedy was shot, I was out there selling the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, just a block from my house. And I remember, calling out the way we used to hear in the TV shows at that time. I said, they actually issued an extra edition that day. And the St. Louis Post-Dispatch was an afternoon newspaper, and it had a 2-star edition, a 3-star edition. But on the day that the assassination occurred, they put out an extra edition, and sure enough, it said extra up in the upper right-hand corner of the newspaper. And I was out there saying, extra, extra, read all about it. Kennedy assassinated in Dallas. So, anyway, I was selling newspapers then. I'm selling the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal still today.
I think of you as a hippie trying to save the world. That was kind of that era. What would you call us back then?
We had those aspirations.
We did have those aspirations. Used to drive my mother nuts that I didn't shave my legs. I remember that. I wouldn't do that today for anything, but back then we did. And then we talked about how he went to Harvard, how he was born an entrepreneur and sold donuts for his junior high prom. Some people are just born and cannot stop creating businesses. And something before the break that you said that I really relate to is you love creating small businesses. I just almost have to sit on my hands to not go bankrupt because I want to start new businesses all the time. I see opportunities. I want to start them, and I have to remind myself I don't have enough time and energy to do all that. So we're going to talk about you living in Boston, going to school at Harvard. You began a weekly habit of reading the Sunday New York Times. And when you came to Little Rock in 1985, 84?
I came here to stay at 81.
81.
Yeah.
That you had no bagels and coffee shops and nobody carried the Sunday edition of the Times.
I came here straight out of business school. I piled everything I had into a van and drove to Arkansas.
To work for Acorn.
That's right, yeah.
And when you got here, was there a New York Times to read?
No. So, I got here in 1977, but I was only here really for about 6 or 7 months. But I took a liking to the Little Rock and wanted to come back. So I eventually did, but that was 4 or 5 years later. And that's when I came back here in 81. I've been here ever since. And it was at that time that I thought, well, I like to read the New York Times. I can't get it here on the day of publication. There was one newsstand down on Main Street that carried the Sunday New York Times, but it came in by bus and it got here on Wednesday or Thursday, 3 or 4 days after the date of publication. And I said, we got to be able to do better than this. So I dug into it and eventually figured out that the only way I could get it here on Sunday was to become a distributor. So that's what I did.
So we have the New York Times in Little Rock now because of you.
It would have gotten here eventually without me, but it got here in 83. No, 82 because of me. And I had a lot of help with it too. My wife was certainly, I guess I have to tell this story. We started bringing the New York Times in by plane on Sunday, the weekend before our wedding. And
she's going to kill you, I can tell.
What that meant was that on our wedding night, in the middle of the night, my wife, Leah, was up in our hotel room organizing the delivery routes that our friends then delivered the papers on the next morning. So afraid I was sleeping, and she was.
She's rolling up papers and making stacks.
Well, the papers weren't there. Yeah, she was just organizing the index cards, what order the routes were going to be delivered, and dividing them into routes. So it was all pretty new at that time, and we probably only had, I don't know, 50 or 60 subscribers at that point.
How'd you get your subscribers? You go out selling door to door, put an ad in the paper. What'd you do to know that you had an audience for it?
Okay, so when I got this idea that I would have to, the only way I could get it here was to be a distributor, I started trying to figure out how am I going to get enough subscribers to persuade the New York Times to ship them here for us. Because they paid the bill for the plane. We didn't. But they had all the logistics arranged and everything like that, because they were already doing that in various other areas. We originally got our papers shipped, flown out of Chicago, and that went on for years. A couple of years. Anyway, long and short of it, I started asking all my friends, well, who do you know that might be interested in reading the New York Times? And they would give me names. I'd get on the phone and call those names, and I'd ask everybody that I spoke to if they had any other names they could recommend. And by that kind of phone tree, going from one caller to the next, one potential subscriber to the next, we got up to, I don't know how many the first week or two, maybe, as I say, 50 or 60, but we eventually got up to a couple hundred. But that's how we got started.
Let's talk about the original community bakery. It was in Rose City. You didn't start it from scratch. You bought it.
That's correct, yeah. So community bakery started in Rose City in 1947, as best I can research, at the Arkansas Studies Center or whatever. And it was there for about 5 years. It moved to Main Street here in South Main here in Little Rock in 1952. And that was the year I was born, by the way. So anyway, it was Ralph Hinson started it. I'm told now with a partner, but I guess he bought his partner out very early. But time it got to Little Rock, it was Ralph by himself, and he put it in the building at 1318 Main. I remember that address quite well, of course, but that's where Raduno's Pizza is today. Oh. And so when I bought the business, that's where it was, and I operated it there for 10 years as a tenant, and then bought the property down the street a block away and redeveloped that property and moved it down there in 1993. So I bought it in 83, moved there in 93. And it was at that point that it became a bakery cafe and dessert coffee house, which was really what my original aspiration was. But, how
did you first decide that was the one? How did that coming to buy that coffee shop come to pass?
Well, it wasn't a coffee shop when I bought it. It was just a
diner.
It wasn't even that. It was just a hole-in-the-wall retail bakery. If you went into the customer area, it was no bigger than this room we're in right now, honestly. And it had 3 or 4 or 5 display cases, and that was it.
And you're like, I think I'll buy this. No, what happened?
I didn't do that. So what happened was I actually, when I came to Little Rock, I wanted to look for a business to buy or start up or join in as a partner. And I was kind of predisposed towards something in manufacturing or fabricating. That was just kind of my interest. And I had made an offer on a small fabricating business I thought I'd like to operate. And but while I was waiting for kind of a reply on my offer, I went down and went to Community Bakery and asked to speak to the owner and asked if we could rent the facilities after hours to bake desserts for a coffee house that some friends wanted to start, the one with the New York Times and the bagels. And she told me her name was Agnes Bargle. Now, she was the second owner of the bakery, Ralph Hinson. She was Ralph Hinson, the original person who started Community Bakery. She was Ralph Hinson's head decorator, and he sold it to her in the mid-'70s, 76, 77, thereabouts. So here I am in 83, and I go in and talk to her, and she told me, there wasn't really any after hours when they weren't there. And I thought that was just a put off, but I learned later she was telling the truth.
They were baking back there, yeah.
Well, not just baking. That's that's a story in itself. I might get to that in a second. But anyway, she said, what do you want to do? And I told her we just, how we wanted to bake desserts because we had a spot in mind where we wanted to do this coffee house, but the fire regs wouldn't let any cooking happen on premises. So we needed an offsite place to bake. And she said, well, that won't really work, but why don't you just buy the bakery from me? And I said, well, I didn't really have that in mind, but I didn't say no. And I went away. And when the other deal didn't work out, I came back and Agnes and I worked out something, and I ended up buying it. I'll just make one reference to Agnes and her stamina, although if any of her relatives are listening, they probably shoot me for telling this story. But
oh, good. That's my favorite kind of stories.
So Agnes would, when I bought the bakery, it was a pretty thin operation. There were only 7 employees, and 3 of them were bakers, 2 of them were decorators, and 2 of them worked the front counter, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and that was it. But anyway, Agnes, the second decorator, was her daughter. But Agnes on the weekends was so busy decorating cakes that she would, on Friday night, she might work, until way after closing. The bakery closed at 6 o'clock in the evening at that time, but she'd work until 10 o'clock. Then she'd go, she had a cot in the business in a closet under a stairwell.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
And she'd go in there and she'd get a couple hours of sleep before she would then let her bakers in at 2:30 in the morning to come in and start baking cake all over again. So she really was there around the clock sometimes.
That's a different kind of mentality than we have today.
She, as I say, she had more stamina. She had more commitment. She was the hardest working person I've ever run into.
Well, it is an I don't think some people realize how lucky we are that we can work anywhere, anytime we want to, because people are like, oh, I've got to go to work. And it's like, really, you should be like, oh boy, I'm so glad I live in a country where I can work at any job I want to work at. Yeah.
Well,
my aunt lived under the stairs in my grandmother's house. She was a school teacher. I don't think that was as, it was probably, she was probably from the Depression era.
Yeah. That's
a great story.
That's a committed teacher, though.
It's like Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners what an enterprise zone is and how you get tax credits, because this is good news.
Well, yes and no. So it's empowerment zone.
I'm sorry, empowerment zone.
No problem. You said that earlier. But in any event, so the Pulaski County was designated as an empowerment zone back in, I want to say 2001. It's been that long. It's been quite a while. But in any event, but the empowerment zone legislation has expired.
It has?
Yeah.
No, I'm still taking tax benefits from it.
Well, you did last year, right?
Well, she told me to send it over this year. Maybe
she did.
She doesn't know, I guess, yet. We'll find out.
she may know. Have her tell me.
Okay.
Because
so it expired like this year?
Well, it's expired multiple times, but each time it has expired, it's been extended.
Oh, okay.
Now, last year, it expired at the end of, 2016. And then it did not exist for 2017. But back in February of 2018, as part of the deal to reopen the government in February of last year, part of the legislation extended the empowerment zone through 2017, which had already closed 2 months earlier. But that's why we all got to claim an empowerment zone credit for 2017. I'm hoping the same thing will happen this time around.
I am too. So what it is empowerment zone means that if you hire somebody that lives within the empowerment zone that's specified,
yeah,
that the government will give you a tax benefit for their salary.
Yes. So there are a variety of things that benefit. There are a variety of things that the empowerment zone put into place. But one of them is the employment credits, and that's what you're referring to, and that's all I've made use of. And yes, what the rule there is that if you have an employee if you operate your business in the empowerment zone,
that's right,
and it's not all of Pulaski County, it's very narrow. If your business is in the empowerment zone, and your employee employee lives in the empowerment zone, those two criteria, and as long as they meet some other criteria, they got to work for you for a minimum of 3 months, and they can't be a relative. I mean, they can't be a family member, and a few other exclusions. But be that as it may, if they meet those criteria, then you can claim a employment credit, and
it adds up.
It has,
and if you've got
it's very
60,
significant.
if you get 65 employees like you do, that can make a big difference.
It did. It has made a big difference. In the early years when we did it, I kind of saw it as just kind of a windfall, and we actually gave out extra bonuses to our employees, which we called easy bonuses.
Easy bonuses.
We did that for a number of years, but then when costs caught up with us on other fronts, those easy bonuses kind of just segued into just regular bonuses, and we
We didn't get to talk about your passing the baton. You'll have to come back and tell me about that. Maybe after because you said you're going to start talking about retirement. But I do have a gift for you. Thank you so much. Look here. It's a desk set with flags.
Look at those flags. That's fabulous.
That's U.S. You recognize it.
I recognize, of course, that's Arkansas. And this one is...
One of them's Boston and one of them's Missouri.
Oh, is that right?
Or Massachusetts.
Okay, I was going to say.
Massachusetts, not Boston.
I'll recognize Missouri. Okay, all right. Okay.
Isn't that good?
Well, fabulous, Kerry. Thank you so much. That was awfully thoughtful of you to put that together. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. I hope you enjoy it.